They thought he was just a lost golden retriever, but when he started chirping like a bird, climbing cabinets like a cat, and vanishing into the forest for hours, Caleb realized he hadn't rescued a dog. He had welcomed something no law could explain, and no heart could forget. What do you do when the animal you love is a miracle you're not allowed to keep? Stay to the end, because what this little girl did to save him will restore your faith in everything. The storm had rolled in fast over Green Ridge, a small town tucked against the western ridges of Oregon's forested mountains. Snow fell in heavy wet clumps, blanketing the pine trees and muffling the usual sounds of the wildlife. Streetlights in town flickered under the weight of the wind, and just outside the northern edge of the city, where paved roads turned to gravel and the forest thickened, Caleb Monroe steered his old red pickup down the winding drive toward home. Caleb was 38 tall, with a broad chest and lean frame hardened from years working in forestry. His hands were always nicked from trail work and tree marking his fingernails eternally rimmed in pine dust. He wore his auburn beard short and often tucked the edge of his flannel collar up against the wind, which always seemed to catch his neck no matter how tightly he bundled. Caleb was quiet by nature, not unfriendly, but reserved. Since the accident that took his younger sister, a single mother, killed in a car crash the previous spring, Caleb had retreated further into solitude, taking guardianship of his niece Emily, but sending her to stay temporarily with her grandmother in Salem while he tried to pull his life back together. The truck's headlights barely pierced the curtain of snow. Caleb squinted as the wipers pushed aside another slurry of ice. Just before he turned onto the final half-mile of forest road leading to his cabin, something flickered in the periphery of the beams, a lump in the snow off the shoulder. At first, he thought it might be a clump of slush fallen from a passing truck, but something about it held a shape too intentional, too fragile. Caleb slowed to a crawl and eased onto the gravel shoulder. The snow crunched beneath the tires as he put the truck in park and reached across the seat for his flashlight. The cold was biting. Wind whipped into his jacket as he stepped out. He kept his light-trained low boots crunching through powder until he reached the form. It was a puppy barely alive. The creature was no more than 7 or 8 weeks old, its golden fur matted with snow, and ice eyes squinting against the wind, ears drooped and motionless. Its sides shivered in rapid spasms, and when Caleb crouched down beside it, it let out a faint whimper. Not a bark, not even a yelp. A strange, high-pitched trill, like the chirp of a songbird caught in its throat. "Hey, little one," Caleb muttered, tugging off his coat. His voice was a soft gravel worn from years of speaking low in the woods. "Where the hell did you come from?" He swaddled the pup in flannel and rose, clutching the bundle close to his chest. The animal didn't resist, limp from cold and exhaustion. Inside the truck, Caleb turned the heat to full blast. He set the pup on the passenger seat where it curled tightly into itself, despite the warmth. Its fur, now visible under the interior light, was a burnished gold, not the dull tan of a mutt, but the gleaming coat typical of well-bred golden retrievers. Caleb glanced toward it repeatedly as he drove, unease beginning to stir despite himself. The pup's eyes, though half-closed, glinted in a way he couldn't quite describe, almost amber under the dashboard light and unnervingly sharp. Back at the cabin, a modest wooden structure nestled among Douglas firs, Caleb moved quickly. He set up a small nest beside the wood stove, layering blankets from the guest bedroom, and placed the puppy there. It didn't sleep, not right away. Instead, it watched him from the nest with a gaze too steady, too intent. When he turned to grab towels from the bathroom, he swore it had shifted to follow him, not just with its eyes, but with its entire head. Silent, no panting, no tail wag. Caleb sighed and crouched next to it again. "You're not what I expected," he muttered. He made a warm mash of boiled chicken and oats in a small dish, brought it over, and held it out. The pup sniffed, looked up at him, then turned its head away. Caleb frowned. Most strays were ravenous. He dipped his finger into the broth and brought it to the pup's mouth. It licked his finger slowly at first, then with more interest. Still no sound, still that eerie stillness. Thunder cracked in the distance, rolling off the mountain like an echo from deep time. Caleb sat back against the wall watching the puppy doze. The wood stove ticked as it warmed the room. Outside, snow kept falling thick and endless. He should name it. Emily would want a name when she returned next week. She loved animals, drew them constantly. That golden coat would be perfect for one of her sketches. Caleb whispered to himself, "Sawyer, that'll do." The puppy twitched in its sleep. For the first time that night, its tail gave a single flick. Caleb allowed himself a small smile and closed his eyes for a moment. Then it came. A chirp. Not quite a bark, not quite a cry. A chirp like the one from the roadside, higher and clearer than any dog sound Caleb had heard before. It echoed briefly in the cabin's wooden interior. His eyes snapped open. Sawyer hadn't moved. Still curled, still calm, but something about the sound made Caleb's spine tingle. He leaned closer. Sawyer opened one eye, sharp, golden, and alert. That night, Caleb found himself unable to sleep. Even as the storm passed over the town of Greenridge and the forest settled under its white shroud, the sound of that strange, delicate chirp lingered in his ears. The snow had quieted overnight, leaving behind a landscape soft and still beneath a pale gray sky. Caleb Monroe stood in the kitchen of his cabin just outside Greenridge, leaning on the counter, watching the strange little creature he had taken in 2 nights ago. Sawyer lay near the wood stove, head resting on his front paws, not asleep, but perfectly still, his eyes following Caleb's every movement with unnerving calm. Caleb placed a shallow dish of warmed goat milk and ground chicken on the floor, nudging it gently forward. "You've got to eat something," he muttered. The puppy sniffed, once turned his head and walked away again. That made it the 4th meal in a row he had refused. No barking, no whining, no begging. Just silence and that odd bird-like chirping when he was startled or alert. Later that morning, Caleb found the missing sock. It had vanished yesterday. Now it lay tucked behind the armchair along with 2 bottle caps and a bit of rope Sawyer had somehow pulled from the storage bin. The objects were placed together in a tight little pile, almost like a nest. He crouched beside it, frowning. "You're a weird one," he said softly. He reached to collect the sock, but Sawyer suddenly appeared, stepping between Caleb's hand and the hoard. The puppy didn't growl or bare his teeth, but his body language was unmistakable, protective, defensive, and oddly calculated. Caleb held up his hands. All right. Keep it." That afternoon, the wind picked up again, brushing the trees against the cabin's roof. Caleb sat on the front steps, running his hand through his beard as he watched the long drive. A gray sedan pulled in at 30 sharp. He stood as the car door opened, revealing a 10-year-old girl with tangled brown hair and a coat 2 sizes too big. Emily Monroe had always been small for her age, with serious gray eyes and a thoughtful manner far older than her years. Since the death of her mother, Caleb's sister, she had spent months staying with her maternal grandmother in Salem. Now she was here to live with Caleb full-time. She pulled her suitcase up the porch stairs without a word and wrapped her arms around Caleb's waist. He placed a hand on her back, squeezing gently. "Hey, kiddo." "Hey," she whispered. "Is it always this quiet here?" He gave a tired smile. "Usually." She stepped inside, looking around the cabin with familiar eyes. "You didn't move the stove?" "Nope. You still use the same mugs, still can't break 'em." She walked to the edge of the rug, then paused. "What's that?" Sawyer stood halfway beneath the couch watching her silently. That Caleb said stepping beside her is Sawyer. Emily blinked. Is he yours? Sort of. Found him in the snow. Been trying to get him to eat for 2 days. Emily crouched. Hey there, she whispered. Sawyer didn't move, but after a long moment he sniffed the air, then crept forward. Emily reached out a hand. He pressed his nose against her fingers once, then retreated. Why doesn't he bark? She asked. Caleb sighed. I'm not sure he knows how. The next few hours passed quietly. Emily unpacked her things and helped Caleb set up her room. She returned to Sawyer's side again and again, fascinated by how he moved, soft, deliberate, silent. She placed a toy near him, then a folded scarf. He didn't play with either. But later that night, Caleb found both items tucked behind the firewood bin Sawyer had hidden them, just like the sock. Maybe he's nervous, Caleb told Emily as they sat by the fire that evening. Or maybe he remembers something bad, Emily said softly, stroking Sawyer's back. Like me. Caleb didn't know what to say to that, so he just reached out and pulled her close. Sawyer curled beside them on the rug, eyes half closed, silent and still. By the end of the second week, Sawyer had grown faster than Caleb expected. What had been a shivering bundle of fluff rescued from a snowbank now stood tall and graceful, his frame lean and his limbs longer than most puppies of his supposed age. Even Caleb, who was not easily shaken by unusual things, had begun to watch the dog with a quiet unease. One morning, Emily sat cross-legged on the rug, sketchbook resting on her knees, her head tilted slightly as she studied Sawyer from across the room. He lay near the window, sunlight pouring in over his fur. She narrowed her eyes. "Uncle Caleb," she called out. "Yeah, his fur is changing." Caleb glanced up from the kitchen table, squinting toward the dog. In the sunlight, Sawyer's coat shimmered not just gold now, but tinged with copper and red. It wasn't just the light. It was color that hadn't been there when they first brought him home. Caleb stepped closer. He knelt beside Sawyer and ran his fingers along the pup's back. The fur felt thicker too, almost like it had a second layer that wasn't there before. "Huh," he muttered. "That's new." Emily set her pencil down and got up, walking closer. "He looks different every day." That night, as the wind picked up and the moon rose behind broken clouds, Caleb stirred from sleep to a sound that didn't belong. It wasn't barking or whimpering. It was a sharp, echoing hoot, soft but deliberate. He sat up and stared toward the doorway. The sound came again. He grabbed his flashlight and crept down the hall to the living room. There, standing on the windowsill, was Sawyer. His head was tilted back slightly, eyes reflecting pale light from outside. Then, once more, he let out a sound high melodic and almost haunting, like an owl calling from deep in the woods. Caleb didn't move. He just watched. The next morning, Emily rushed to show him a page in her sketchbook. It was a drawing of Sawyer, but not exactly. The creature in her picture was fox-like in posture, with long legs and a tail that curled elegantly. Its fur glowed in shades of red and gold, and around its head she had drawn faint halos of light. "He's not just a dog," she said with quiet certainty. "I think he's something else." Caleb stared at the image for a long moment before saying anything. "We need to have someone take a look at him." Later that afternoon, Caleb called Dr. Madeline Brooks, the local vet who worked just outside Timber Hollow. She had treated dogs in the region for over 20 years and was known for her calm approach and sharp eye. Dr. Brooks was a tall woman in her late 40s with silver-threaded dark hair pulled back in a low ponytail and a matter-of-fact tone that made both humans and animals settle. She greeted them at the small clinic's side door and led Sawyer into the exam room. As she examined him, his paws-eye spine and coat-her face shifted subtly. She didn't say much at first, just small nods and the occasional, "interesting." "He's very healthy," she said finally, "but there are unusual features." Caleb crossed his arms. "Like what?" "For one, his legs are long for his size and age. His coat has an odd density, more like a wild canine than a retriever. And his vocalizations. He sounds like a bird sometimes," Emily offered. Dr. Brooks looked at the girl, then at Caleb. "That's not something I've ever heard from a retriever." She stepped back and folded her hands. "It's possible he's not fully golden, could be a mix, maybe something less common, but without genetic testing I wouldn't guess." Emily clutched her sketchbook tightly to her chest. She looked down and whispered, "He's still Sawyer, even if he's weird." Caleb glanced between the vet, his niece, and the creature on the table, who stared calmly back with eyes that flickered gold in the light. "Yeah," he said quietly. "He's still Sawyer." It was just after midnight when Caleb heard the soft thud. He lay still in bed, eyes wide open, waiting for it to repeat. The house was silent for a beat, save the wind brushing the windows. Then another faint sound, this time a scrape. Not loud, not threatening, but deliberate. He rose, pulled on his flannel, and stepped out into the hallway, keeping his footfalls light across the old wooden floors. The glow from the kitchen light was dim. He always left it on low for Emily in case she woke at night. But now it cast long shadows over the counters, stretching like fingers across the walls. He moved toward the doorway and froze. There, perched on the edge of the lower cabinet, was Sawyer. His paws balanced easily on the narrow strip of wood. One of the cupboard doors swung open beside him. Between his teeth dangled a strip of smoked beef, one Caleb thought he'd wrapped tightly and placed on the top shelf 2 nights ago. Sawyer leapt down effortlessly. Not a sound as he landed and trotted out of the room. Caleb followed, but quietly, curiosity overruling concern. Sawyer patted down the hall and slipped into the corner of the living room behind the firewood basket. By the time Caleb peeked around the corner, the meat was gone. No chewing, no swallowing. Just vanished, hidden, most likely. The next morning he said nothing. Instead, while Emily worked on schoolwork at the table, and Sawyer lounged beneath the coat rack, Caleb installed an old wildlife camera, something he'd used for trail monitoring in the national forest. He mounted it on the top corner of the living room, its view aimed across the kitchen and hallway. It was motion-triggered, silent, and inconspicuous. That night, Caleb set his phone to sync with the footage and waited. By the 3rd night, his suspicions were confirmed and then exceeded. Sawyer didn't sleep. Or if he did, it was only in short bursts. Around 1:43 a.m., the pup reappeared in the kitchen frame. He pushed open the pantry door with his front paws and stood on hind legs like a dancer, stretching nearly vertical. His balance was uncanny. He slipped his paw into the shelf and pulled down a sealed bag of crackers. He didn't eat them, just sniffed, tucked them behind the microwave, and walked away. At 2:12, Sawyer scaled the back of the couch, perching like a cat on the narrow frame, before leaping silently to the windowsill. For 10 minutes he sat still, staring into the dark woods. Then, as if responding to something unseen, he chirped a sound, sharp and short, like a signal, and leapt back to the floor. In the morning, Caleb showed none of this to Emily. Instead, he just asked gently, "Did you notice Sawyer's been more active at night?" Emily looked up from her sketchpad, chewing the end of her pencil. "I hear him, sometimes," she admitted. "He moves like he's searching for something." Caleb nodded. He opened the cabinets. Her eyebrows rose. With his paws, "Yeah." She was quiet for a long moment, then got up and retrieved her sketchpad. She hesitated before flipping to the latest page. The drawing showed Sawyer, but not just as the dog they knew. In the picture, his body stretched longer tail, more plume-like, with almost flame-shaped markings. His eyes were larger, glinting, and his limbs curved like he was halfway in motion. The strange part was what surrounded him, an aura almost. Swirls of wind or energy drawn with charcoal and faint gold pencil. I didn't try to draw him like that, she said softly. It just happened. Caleb took the sketch pad and stared at the image. Do you dream about him? Emily hesitated. Sort of. I see him running through the trees, but not like a dog, more like a spirit, fast and silent. Caleb glanced toward the corner where Sawyer now lay, curled up, pretending to nap. His tail twitched. That evening, Caleb placed a trail snack bar on the top of the fridge. He left it there on purpose just to see what would happen. He also left his phone on the kitchen counter recording on silent. By morning, the snack bar was gone, and the footage showed Sawyer scaling the chair to the countertop, then leaping onto the fridge with all the quiet grace of a cat. He didn't tear the wrapper. He didn't eat it. He took it in his mouth, climbed down with care, and vanished behind the hallway storage chest. Caleb opened the chest carefully later and found an odd collection socks pencils, the snack bar still sealed, a measuring spoon, 2 marbles, and a small photo of Emily's mother that had been sitting on the bookshelf. Nothing chewed. Everything intact. He sat on the edge of the couch, rubbing his temples. Sawyer walked past his eyes, grazing Caleb's face. In those eyes was no guilt, no mischief, only quiet purpose. He chirped once, then returned to Emily's feet. The thaw had come slowly to Greenridge. By the 3rd week of March, most of the snow had receded from the forest floor, leaving behind a mixture of damp soil, broken branches, and the pale shoots of early wildflowers. The trail behind Caleb's cabin wound through cedar groves and old pine, a narrow path that had once been used by elk, but now mostly served as a quiet place for walks. That afternoon, Emily begged to take Sawyer on a short hike. Caleb hesitated at first. Sawyer's behavior had grown increasingly unpredictable at night, but Emily was insistent. Just to the stream and back, she promised, already tugging on her boots. I'll take my whistle. And Sawyer listens to me. Sawyer sat nearby, head cocked, golden eyes fixed on the girl like he understood every word. In the past week, he had stopped responding to typical dog commands, but would react instantly to her tone, especially when she whispered, as if the whisper carried something deeper than sound. Caleb finally relented. Stay close to the path, he said, handing her a small 2-way radio. You check in every 15 minutes. Emily grinned and nodded, her cheeks flushed with excitement. She zipped up her red parka, grabbed the leash, though Sawyer barely needed it, and headed out the dog, trotting silently beside her. An hour later, Caleb sat on the porch sharpening his old field knife when the radio crackled. We're fine, Emily's voice came through. Sawyer found something cool, a pile of feathers, like from a hawk or something. Don't touch it, Caleb said firmly, and head back soon. It's getting late. Copy that. But they didn't return as quickly as he expected. The second call went unanswered. Caleb's unease began to rise. He grabbed his coat, slid the revolver into the back of his waistband, a habit he never quite abandoned from his forest ranger days, and set off down the trail. The forest was quiet, unnervingly so. No birdsong, no rustling squirrels, just the steady crunch of boots on damp ground. He walked faster. Then, just past the bend by the mossy log, he heard it, a low, resonant growl. Caleb stepped into a small clearing and froze. Emily stood rooted in place just a few yards ahead, one hand at her side, the leash dangling slack. Beside her, Sawyer stood tall and completely still, his fur bristling faintly in the wind. Across from them, at the edge of the trees, was a lone gray wolf. The wolf was large, larger than Caleb remembered from his ranger training, with pale, intelligent eyes and a posture that was more curious than aggressive. It made no move to charge, no teeth bared. It simply stared. Then Sawyer stepped forward. He didn't bark. Instead, he raised his head and released a low harmonic sound across, between a hum and a howl. It wasn't threatening, it was almost melodic. The wolf twitched its ears and tilted its head. For a moment, nothing moved. Then slowly, the wild animal turned and vanished into the trees. Emily exhaled sharply and grabbed Sawyer's collar. "Did you see that?" she breathed as Caleb reached her side. "I saw it," he muttered, still stunned. "Why didn't it attack Sawyer? Talked to it." They walked home in silence. That night, Caleb couldn't sleep. He sat at the kitchen table, laptop open tabs, scattered with titles like Canines with Cross-Species Vocal Patterns and Unusual Predator Interactions. The wolf encounter had shaken him. Wolves didn't typically retreat from confrontation, and they didn't freeze in response to a domestic dog's sound, unless that sound meant something to them. The next morning, while Emily read on the porch, Caleb drove into town. The Greenridge Sheriff's Office was tucked behind the fire station, a squat brick building with a wooden sign and a coffee machine that never quite worked. Sheriff Ray Coleman was behind the desk when Caleb walked in, broad-shouldered gruff with thick arms crossed over a khaki uniform. Ray had worked in Greenridge for 25 years and had once been Caleb's high school baseball coach. Now he was the town's unofficial judge of all things suspicious. Ray looked up, one eyebrow rising. "Monroe, haven't seen you in months." "What brings you in?" Caleb sat down without preamble. "I need to ask a question about animal registration. Specifically, hybrids." Ray leaned back slowly. "Hybrids, canine mixes. Ones that might look like dogs but aren't entirely." Ray's eyes narrowed. "You're talking about that thing you've been walking around town." Caleb stiffened. "Sawyer's not a thing." Ray didn't flinch. "I've had 2 calls. People seeing something strange in your yard at night. Long limbs, glowing eyes. Now you're asking me about hybrids. You sure you're not keeping a wild animal?" Caleb hesitated. "He doesn't behave like any dog I've known." "Well," Ray said, straightening, "here's the deal. Oregon law's clear. You keep an unregistered exotic or hybrid and it's a problem. I can't look the other way if someone files a formal report." "Would you?" Ray sighed. "That depends. Just keep him quiet, and don't let anyone else see him doing anything weird." Caleb nodded slowly. "Thanks, Ray." When he returned home, Emily was waiting at the door holding her latest drawing. "I changed him again," she said. "In the picture." This time, Sawyer's form had grown leaner. His back arched like a wildcat tail, longer face narrower with a nose that looked more like a fox's than a dog's. His paws were drawn mid-leap like he was floating. "I didn't mean to draw him like this," she whispered. "It just happens. I think he's changing." Caleb looked down at the page, then over at Sawyer, who sat calmly by the fire, still alert, watching them both. The envelope came on a Thursday morning, slipped quietly into the mailbox outside the cabin. Its only mark, a return address from a private genetics lab in Portland. Caleb stood by the porch steps, coffee cooling in his hand, eyes fixed on the paper he wasn't yet ready to open. Nearby, Sawyer sat perfectly still, his golden-red fur catching the light. His gaze calm but intense, as if he knew this piece of mail would decide something important. Back inside, Caleb sat at the kitchen table and unfolded the letter. One sheet, a few sentences, but they hit like thunder. Genetic profile confirms 91% alignment with Canis aureus primigenius, also known as the Eurasian golden jackal presumed extinct for over a century. Remainder of genome suggests synthetic canine stabilization. Indicators of laboratory origin cloning consistent with non-disclosed experimental breeding. Specimen is unregistered. Status genetically modified classified species. Caleb reread it twice. Sawyer wasn't a wolf or a coyote. He wasn't even a mix of common breeds. He was something older, something brought back. a cloned variant of the golden jackal, an animal declared extinct decades ago and illegal to possess without federal wildlife clearance. He stared at the words genetically modified. His stomach tightened. Emily came into the room, her notebook clutched to her chest. "Did you open it?" Caleb nodded once too slow. "What does it say?" He hesitated, but she was watching with that wide, expectant gaze that made it impossible to lie. "He's not a dog, not really. He's what used to be called a golden jackal, a kind of wild dog. They went extinct over 100 years ago. Someone brought them back." Emily's mouth opened, then closed. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "He's a clone. Yes, they'll take him away." "They might. It's against the law to keep animals like this without a state permit, especially genetically modified ones." Emily sat down slowly. Then, without a word, she pulled open her notebook and began writing. When she was done, she read it aloud. "Dear Governor Myers, my name is Emily Monroe. I'm 10 years old. I live in Greenridge, Oregon. My dog Sawyer is not a regular dog. They say he's an extinct golden jackal and was brought back with science. But he's kind. He protects me. He helped me when my mom died. I don't think it matters where he came from. He's here now, and he's mine. Please don't take him. He's not dangerous. He's family." Caleb looked at her throat tight. "That's a powerful letter. I want to send it." "Can I?" He nodded. "Yes, I'll help you." That evening, after sealing the envelope, Emily placed it in the mailbox herself, standing on tiptoe to drop it in with both hands. While they waited for a reply, Caleb buried himself in paperwork. The special permit application was a maze of requirements: environmental risk assessments, veterinary behavioral documentation, photographic proof of secure housing, personal statements, even character references. Dr. Brooks agreed to write one immediately. Meanwhile, Emily drew. Each new sketch of Sawyer became more surreal. The limbs stretched longer. The eyes glowed brighter. She didn't show them all to Caleb, but he saw them stacked on her desk pages that looked like illustrations from an ancient storybook rather than real life. 5 days later, a call came through. A woman named Marlene Quinn from the governor's office introduced herself. Her tone was formal, but when she mentioned Emily's letter, her voice softened. "The governor read it personally," she said. And he was moved. "He's authorizing an expedited review of your permit application." Caleb could hardly believe it. "So, we have a chance." "You have a chance," she said, "but you need to follow every regulation perfectly. Our office will assign an agent to inspect your property. If the enclosure meets criteria and we verify Sawyer poses no danger to the public, your petition could be granted under Wildlife Exception Clause E7. Caleb swallowed. "Thank you." When he told Emily, she jumped into his arms. Sawyer watched from the kitchen doorway, tail swishing once, then turning silently toward the back window as if he already knew. The wind came through the trees with a different voice that night. Caleb felt it even before the door creaked open, the kind of whispering low rhythm in the branches that spoke of something shifting in the dark. It was nearly midnight, and Emily had been asleep for hours. Sawyer had been curled up at the foot of her bed as usual, but now the spot was empty. Caleb stood in the hallway, one hand on the doorframe, listening to the silence. He checked every room. Nothing. The back door was unlatched. Outside, moonlight filtered through bare pine limbs. The clearing beyond the fence was still. No paw prints in the frost, no chirp, no sign. He called softly once. "Sawyer." Nothing answered. Not even an owl. By the time Caleb reached the forest edge with a flashlight in one hand and a jacket thrown hastily over his shoulders, he already knew this time was different. Sawyer hadn't wandered off for fun. He had left. With purpose. And this time, maybe not to return. For hours, Caleb walked the trails. He reached the stream, circled the old elk meadow, followed the ridgeline. He waited until the sky turned a paler shade of gray and the first pink hints of dawn lit the edge of the mountain. But there was nothing. Just silence. Just the trees. Just the aching cold where something loyal used to be. He returned home, heavy-limbed and hollow, and when Emily came out of her room, rubbing her eyes, she saw it on his face. "He's gone." Caleb nodded. "I think so." She didn't cry right away. Instead, she walked quietly to the window and sat on the bench, sketchbook in her lap but unopened. She stared into the woods without a word. The morning stretched. Caleb tried to distract himself with chores, mending a fence post, double-checking his enclosure plan for the state review, but everything felt dimmer. He tried not to check the forest line every 10 minutes. Failed each time. It wasn't until just after noon, when he stepped onto the porch with a thermos of coffee, that he saw the trail. Tiny, muddy paw prints, not from that morning, but fresh enough to still be moist, tracked across the wood planks of the porch, then vanished toward the side yard. Caleb's heart jumped. He followed them fast, rounding the house, nearly slipping on a patch of wet moss. There he was. Sawyer stood in the center of the backyard, his fur streaked with dirt leaves clinging to his legs, and a streak of green sap on his shoulder. His chest heaved slightly from exertion, and his muzzle was damp, but his golden eyes were calm. Almost proud. Caleb crouched. "Where the hell have you been?" Sawyer padded toward him, slow and deliberate. He didn't make a sound. But Caleb noticed something strange on the dog's fur, a few short, silvery hairs near the flank. Not his, and on his paws, faint scratches and residue that looked like reeds or marsh mud. Curiosity gnawed at Caleb. He followed the trail Sawyer had come from and found the prints leading back toward the tree line. About 50 yards into the woods, near a shallow dip in the terrain where spring water often gathered, Caleb found them hoofprints. Tiny, skittish, and splashes of mud and scattered debris that suggested something had thrashed in panic. A fawn, very young, but now gone. He returned slowly. Back at the cabin, Emily met him with wide eyes. "Was it him?" Caleb nodded. He came back. She smiled for the first time all day, running outside in her socks. Sawyer trotted to meet her, circling once before pressing his head into her chest. Later, as the sky warmed toward evening, Emily drew. She titled it "Sawyer Between Forest and Home." The image showed him standing at the edge of the trees, one paw inside the shadows, the other on a wooden porch. His eyes were looking back, not at the woods, but toward the house. His body was caught mid-turn, half wild and half familiar. Caleb quietly snapped a photo of the piece and posted it to a local art forum with a short caption, "Drawn by my niece, who found something rare in the woods and now calls it family." By morning, it had been shared over 500 times. 2 days later, an envelope arrived. This time, the return address read, "Office of Governor Myers, Salem, Oregon." Inside was a formal letter on embossed paper. It read, "Dear Mr. Monroe, in light of the unique circumstances surrounding your companion, animal known as Sawyer, and the heartfelt appeal from your niece, Emily, the state of Oregon is granting temporary exemption status under Wildlife Research Permit Clause 22B. You are hereby authorized to continue housing Sawyer as long as proper containment and monitoring are upheld. This permit allows conditional oversight in collaboration with Oregon State University's Department of Wildlife Studies, effective immediately. Your case will serve as the foundation for broader discussion on ethical exceptions in genetic wildlife reintroduction. Thank you for your transparency and for reminding us what it means to protect not just nature but bonds between species." Caleb leaned back in his chair, exhaling for the first time in days. Emily read the letter 3 times. then quietly said, "He's allowed to stay." "He's allowed to stay?" Caleb echoed. Sawyer, curled on the rug in the golden evening light, let out a single soft chirp. 1 year had passed since the letter from the governor arrived. The forest around Greenridge had cycled through snow blossom heat and wind, and in all that time Sawyer remained. Not just present, but essential. What began as a strange discovery on a cold trail had become something greater, something stitched into the fabric of the community. The cabin looked different now. Caleb had built a wooden pavilion near the old cedar grove behind the house, fitted with benches carved from downed logs, and a low platform where children could sit in a half-circle. Above it hung a hand-painted sign, "Learning with Sawyer." Every Saturday kids came, some locals, some driven in from towns over. They sat with notebooks or sketch pads while Caleb spoke about tracking animals, identifying scat, and reading the forest, not just as a place to pass through, but as a living story. And beside him always was Sawyer, calm, watchful, quiet as ever. He'd grown into his frame, sleek and radiant. His fur golden and copper and strange shimmered in the morning sun, and his ears twitched at every movement in the trees. When children asked if he could do tricks, Caleb would smile and shake his head. No tricks, just instincts. And yet Sawyer had a way of sensing which child needed him most. If someone came scared or silent, he would sit beside them, pressing close until their hands moved gently through his fur. He never barked, never chased, just existed like a living compass pointing to something deeper in all of them. Emily, now 11, had become the youngest wildlife educator in the county. She designed every session's activity from painting animal tracks to storytelling, with sound recordings of forest creatures. Her long brown hair had grown wild, and she now wore a leather bracelet braided with tiny gold beads, each one symbolizing a memory with Sawyer. One day, she stood at the front of the group holding a piece of watercolor paper. "What makes an animal wild?" she asked the children, her voice strong but light. "Is it where they sleep, what they eat, or just that they don't look like us?" She turned the paper around. It showed Sawyer at the border of two worlds, one half a forest, the other a porch light shining through a window. "I think being wild and being loved are not opposites," she said. "They can live in the same body, just like him." The kids clapped. Behind them, standing off to the side, Dr. Madeline Brooks smiled quietly. Dr. Brooks had changed too. She no longer worked out of a cramped clinic near Timber Hollow. Instead, with Caleb and the town council's help, she had opened the Harmony Den, a new veterinary and animal therapy center at the edge of Greenridge. The building was long and warm-colored with walls of natural stone and windows that opened into small therapy gardens. Children on the spectrum trauma survivors and even elderly veterans came for sessions. And Sawyer was part of that too. He had been officially recognized under the state's Animal Integration and Learning Act, a clause now informally known as the Sawyer Exception. His presence in animal-assisted therapy became both a model and a marvel. He would sit silently beside patients, sensing their anxiety, curling his tail gently over their toes or placing his head in their laps. Dr. Brooks, whose own quiet strength often masked the grief of having once lost a sister in a car crash, found healing through the work. She said little about it, but sometimes she would pause in the doorway and just watch Sawyer as he walked with someone in pain, never trained, never commanded, just responding. At the heart of it all was Caleb. He still looked the same, broad-shouldered grizzled beard, always a little tired, but there was a new light in his face, the kind that comes from finding purpose later in life. He had become the town's unofficial steward of stories. People stopped him in the market, at the diner, even at the gas station, asking about Sawyer. "How'd you find him again? What kind of dog did you say he is?" And always Caleb would answer the same way. "He's not a dog, he's just Sawyer." The town, once hesitant, now embraced the mystery. A mural was painted on the side of the library. Sawyer standing in a forest clearing. Trees bent slightly around him. Emily in the background holding a book. It was titled, "Different is a Gift." Even Sheriff Ray Coleman came around. At a community fundraiser, he made a toast awkwardly, holding a lemonade in one hand. I used to think animals like Sawyer didn't belong in our town, but maybe we needed him more than he needed us. The room had applauded. That night, back at the cabin, Emily, Caleb, and Sawyer sat together under the stars. Fireflies blinked over the field, and a low owl call sounded in the trees. Sawyer lifted his head and chirped in reply, a soft, strange sound that no longer startled anyone. "I wonder if he misses it," Emily said. "The wild." Caleb glanced over. "Maybe, but I think he's got something here that matters too." Sawyer stepped forward and pressed his head against Emily's shoulder. "Yeah," she whispered, "you're home." In that moment it no longer mattered what he had been. A clone, a relic, a mystery. He was Sawyer, and in Greenridge that was enough. Sometimes the greatest miracles do not arrive with thunder or light. They come quietly wrapped in golden fur, walking the line between what we understand and what we fear. Sawyer was never just a dog. He was a reminder that God often places the extraordinary in the most unexpected forms, asking us not just to see, but to believe. When the world tells us something doesn't belong, grace tells us to open our hearts wider. Just like Caleb and Emily chose love over fear, we too can choose compassion when faced with the unknown. In a world divided, stories like Sawyer's remind us that home isn't built by blood or law. It's built by love, by trust, by choosing to stay. So if you've ever felt different, misunderstood, or unsure of where you belong, remember this: God doesn't make mistakes. You are here for a reason. You are loved even in your wildest form. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Comment below if you believe miracles still walk among us. Subscribe for more stories that remind us how deeply we are all connected. And may God bless every soul who reads this. Type Amen if you believe in second chances.